Grace and peace to you all. Welcome to this second chapel of the year and to this bit of land that we are sitting and standing on. This bit of land that houses Shalom Farms, our Westwood Track, and Yaupon Place. This land that we are on, like so many places in Richmond, has a history tied to it with racism and slavery and the Confederacy. And we also recognize that we are likely on what is called Powhatan land. Yet we are also vision keepers. We acknowledge these histories and these stories of this land, as well as continue to reflect on our present and future relationships and involvements within this ecosystem. So welcome. Welcome to this chapel and welcome to this land. A couple of announcements before we get going. Today is clearly a relaxed service. If you need to move, if you need to switch positions or stand or sit or go back and forth, please feel free to do so. After chapel today, lunch is provided back at the school, and we ask that you make sure to take your bulletins with you to recycle when we return. Finally, next week's chapel will be a fellowship as worship, and this will be on our quad. This will begin at 11:45, which is the typical time since we won't have to travel anywhere. And it's going to be hosted by our student government. We will remember together how we are tied together. We will tie-dye t-shirts and consider the ways we let our light shine bright, sort of like a tie-dyed piece of clothing, and not hide it under a bushel. But today we also welcome Emily Nyce, our preacher, a UPSIM alumni and the director and the founder of Yaupon Place. She is also getting us started on our chapel theme for the fall, parables. So let us together prepare our hearts and our minds for worship. Let us worship God.
Hello and welcome. Please join me in our call to worship. Here we gather. Here we pray. Here we sing. Here we are transformed. Let us worship God together.
So you may feel more comfortable in this prayer exercise. Excuse me. You may feel more comfortable in this prayer exercise standing. You may feel more comfortable sitting. I would recommend that you stand. As you are able. Source of all that is, you who are. We enter more deeply into your presence, acknowledging your infinite relationship with us and with all being. As we experience your glory in nature, your care and your love for us, your magnitude and your peace, we recognize also your glory expressed through us. In this moment now, you allow us to rest in the blessed quietness as we journey to the center. I invite us to just hold a moment of silence. If you'd like now, you can remove your shoes. But if you'd like to keep your shoes on, just practice getting rooted into the land. Press your toes to the earth. Allow them some movement, allow them to wiggle. Press your heels into the earth. Know that they are grounding you. Press your soles into the earth and give those toes another stretch. And recognize that just as your feet are supporting you, the earth is pressing back against us, supporting us too. Thank God for the strength of your ankles. Feel the blood moving up your legs. Into your knees. If your knees are tight, just relax them. Feel the strength of your midsection. And allow that to lengthen. Inviting air into your upper body. Take a moment to feel the pulsations in your hands. To recognize the beat of your heart. If you like to roll your neck, and then bring it back to center. Experience the clarity in your head, in your mind. And the air above the crown of your scalp. Recognize that you are nature. And that there is no separation. And that the love of God is with you. And not only with you, but in you. And in everyone around you. In everything, in the birds, in the air, in the hum of the traffic, in the rustle of the trees, in each breath. The love of God is there. And we give all praise, glory, and honor to the Most High, the source of all that is, from which we came and to which we will return. Amen, amen, amen. Our Old Testament reading is from Ezekiel chapter 17. You may be seated if you like. Verses 22 through 24. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Thus says the Lord God, "Yourself take a sprig from the lofty top of a cedar. I will set it out. I will break off the tender one from the topmost of its young twigs. I myself will plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain height of Israel, I will plant it in order that it may produce boughs and bear fruit and become a cedar. Under it, every kind of bird will live. In the shade of its branches will nest winged creatures of every kind. All the trees of the field shall know that I am the Lord. I bring low the high tree. I make high the low tree. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will accomplish it. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide the people with grain, for so you have prepared it. You water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with richness. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy.
Our new reading is from Matthew 13, 31 through 32. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in its field. It is the smallest of the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds in the air come and make nests in its branches. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God.
Or afternoon. Good to see everyone. So it was August 2017, and we were sitting with our small group from church in a living room. My husband, Travis, and I had decided to move from Harrisonburg to Richmond, both of us wanting to pursue our vocational interests more intentionally. And for me, that meant here, Union Presbyterian Seminary. I had just spent about a decade in Richmond and Harrisonburg, working in churches and community spaces, studying church history and religions and politics and ethics and peace, even a semester in the Middle East where every conversation seemed to start or end with, "It's complicated." I was getting tired of that answer, "It's complicated." But it did seem that growing closer to God had meant becoming more deeply aware and often overwhelmed with the complications of life. I was headed to seminary without any real goal for a profession. I really just had a burning desire to study what this crazy, changing, complex moment meant for our world, for me, for churches and people of all faith. And so our small group that night sat together and blessed me and Travis into the next chapter ahead. And their hopes and prayers were beautiful, heartfelt. We were full of gratitude. And then just as I was packing up and we were about to go, Rhoda, the wonderful wise wife of Mennonite theologian Norman Krauss, comes up to me with one last urgent blessing. She says, "Emily, seek the simplicity after the complexity. Seek the simplicity after the complexity." In that moment, my mind opened wide and snatched that phrase quickly, lodging it right at the center of my heart. Simplicity after complexity. I loved it. I wasn't sure that I believed it yet. And I wrestled with that phrase around in myself obsessively until I came to a slight revision. Simplicity amidst complexity. Because that word after sounded a little too linear, as if all the complexity of the world would fall away after some light bulb epiphany. But life I'd experienced always had complexity, but I hadn't given simplicity enough power to speak back against it, to hold all this tension with hope. Thank God for Rhoda, for all our wise ones. Because this simple truth ended up illuminating so much of my vocational interest and my relationship to scriptures as I studied at Union, the parables particularly. See, Jesus was known for his ability to speak salvific simplicities amidst horrible complexities. In fact, he purposefully spoke in parables for that reason. Parables are often seen as these paradoxes of complex simplicity. And in Matthew 13, after we hear the parable of the mustard seed and a few others, the writer of Matthew says, quote, Jesus told the crowd all these things in parables. Without a parable, he told them nothing. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth to speak in parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. Stories and parables and images ignite the fierce hope that Jesus had in the face of injustices. And as Matthew notes, Jesus is right in line with his prophetic Jewish tradition. Nothing but a parable, a story, can truly unveil the foundations of the world. And so how can this mustard parable reveal the holy simplicity embedded at the core of God's invitation to us now? Well, for the mustard seed, we do need to go back to Ezekiel. In the ancient Near Eastern cultures, there were several circulating, well-known stories of the cosmic cedar tree, tall and strong, linking the heavens to the earth and the underworld, alluding to the divinity of a strong and mighty nation. Jabril read that for us. And the people of Israel knew those stories circulating. They heard this and decided to weave it into their worldview too. And there are several references to other strong and mighty trees, often a cedar, in the Hebrew scriptures. Ezekiel, prophetically wanting to cast judgment against the other nation, reinterprets the story that he's heard elsewhere and says actually that Yahweh, the God of Israel, is making Israel into a mighty, noble cedar tree. Ezekiel reinterprets what power and divine partnership looks like. It's about having every kind of bird nest in its branches, about God bringing high the low tree, drying up the green tree, and making the dry tree flourish. But Ezekiel still uses the common empire-associated cosmic tree story of their time to do this. And so Jesus, being Jesus, knows this story and pushes it so much further. He throws out the cedar and embraces instead a mustard plant. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in its field. It is the smallest of seeds, but when it grows, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Jesus' words here are purposefully, almost word for word, from Daniel and Ezekiel and other ancient Near Eastern descriptions of this cedar tree, but turned into a story about a simple farmer and a simple mustard seed. In fact, it's really, really simple. Maybe even irrelevantly simple to our ears right now. Upon first read, for our American context, to me, it sounds like a little story built on rainbows and glitter glue. It sounds like the American dream: start small, work hard, grow into greatness. It's usually just told as a personal parable, not a political and communal one. And so we usually just read this to kids and forget about it as soon as we adults learn how complex and politically destructive this world really is. How could the mustard seed, the parable, possibly speak to our confusing, heartbreaking, anything but simple world? What is God trying to say? What are the specifics? What's the plan here about how we can join the Spirit through a mustard seed perspective? How can an image and a story so seemingly simple oppose the empire's destruction? How is this supposed to spark action and hope and programs and plans in September 2021 of Richmond, Virginia? Well, Ezekiel first slows us down, reminding us that Jesus is alluding to something far more political and communal through this parable of a mustard seed. And second, we must remember that Jesus was a complicated individual born into a time and a place that was complex, wrought with injustice at every turn. For Jesus, there was the Roman Empire, occupying his people's land, a military-industrial complex abusing the lowest classes and corrupting many powerful leaders of Jesus' beautiful, beloved religion. Sound familiar? And there were revolts and social unrest, and there was vast ideological disagreements from various groups claiming the same religion. Sound familiar? And the building, farming, fishing communities were being threatened by takeover of an industrial, politically funded monopoly at the time. Small farmers and fishing families all over Palestine losing their livelihoods and any chance they had of autonomy and food and job security. Not to mention the environmental destruction from cash crops and monocultures. Sound familiar? And there were public executions along the streets by the government-funded policing system that had turned into a terrorist militia protecting the greed of the elite. Again, the familiarities are striking. And more could be said. Jesus' time and our time are different in so many ways, but Jesus is not simply speaking parables into the world that have nothing to say to us now. These short little stories are everything. They're not meant to belittle and ignore life's complexities. They're meant to spark action and hope amidst all of it. Jesus, like his Jewish ancestors, believes in the power of storytelling to address injustices and mobilize communities for good, to share stories among each other that grow God's kingdom community. Jesus sees serious theological, political problems for using the cedar tree for his particular context, for his ecological place and people. The first problem was that cedars were being imported from Lebanon. They were for the rich to build their ornate buildings, which was all being built by Jesus and his countrymen, migrant workers abused in the system. And of course, that was also environmentally destructive. And third, just the look of a cedar tree is daunting, which is kind of the point in the Old Testament scripture. But cedars are large and overpowering, and Jesus was discovering a God whose power was in the vulnerability of life, in solidarity with the impoverished and abused, with the weak, with the earth. Jesus was convinced that God cared about all the least of these. And so a cedar with its landscape prominence made no sense for connecting to the power of God's vulnerability and God's vulnerable people. Jesus was a pacifist and a mystic and a prophet, and the cedar tree was the cosmic tree of empires. That kind of image and story just didn't work. And so the mustard tree, on the other hand, was this scrappy, local, backyard medicinal plant growing all over Palestine. It held a metaphor for the kind of communal living that Jesus believed in. Instead of branches that reached to the heavens and way down to Sheol, the mustard plant was more of a bush, averaging 5 to 7 feet tall. The branches were very low to the ground. You see, the cosmic mustard tree fit Jesus' description of heaven being near, right here on earth, the kingdom accessible to those not considered powerful by the empire. The mustard plant was also medicinal, used for colds and respiratory issues, and the Palestinian people of the land knew this, working the land. And so the mustard plant proclaimed God's healing, gospel of healing. It witnessed to God caring about their bodies, their ailments, their full selves. And as Jesus quotes back to his Jewish covenant of God and Israel, the mustard tree also grows for all the birds of the air to come and make nests in the branches. Of course, this is interpreted first as a metaphorical story of smaller, poorer nations being welcomed into community, about immigrants and refugees and exiles welcomed into God's family. But it's also literal. It's about good news for the whole earth and all God's creatures being in community together. And last but not least, it's a farmer, someone, anyone, who plants this prophetic seed. It's not hoarded by the 1%. We have agency to plant and grow this kind of good news as God's partners in the world. And so what is this simplicity revealed through this parable? What action is beckoning of us? The parable of the mustard plant is simply about cultivating good community. It's about a holy kingdom, and it throws off all attachments to empire. It proclaims an equitable heaven on earth, a local, accessible justice, ecologically hospitable, a healing, embodied spirit of hope. This parable says God is here. The divine spirit is rooted and grown through community that looks like a mustard plant, or we could say a Yaupon plant. Because if Jesus were here in these lands, he'd actually use that cosmic cedar tree to reinterpret as the parable of the Yaupon plant. Yaupon is wildly similar to the Palestinian mustard in all its botanical characteristics. It's a small, humble, local little tree that grows incredibly resiliently and low to the ground. It's bushy, branchy, full of wildlife accessible to the masses. It's an equitable kingdom. Yaupon is also medicinal. It's healing for the body. It's the only known caffeinated tea plant of the Americas. Its leaves, which we roast, actually hold more antioxidants than green tea, blueberries, and elderberry combined. It's good news for our bodies. And Yaupon, it looks like a holly, and it grows little red berries. And the red berries, they are toxic for human consumption, but the birds love them. The birds of the air come and make nests in its branches, and they eat of its abundant fruit. It is the hospitable gospel both Ezekiel and Jesus believed in. And because this plant is for our time and our space, I believe Jesus wants our hearts wrapped up within a Yaupon image of the kingdom, because Yaupon is also only known to us because of the indigenous peoples of this land. People who have been exiled and experienced genocide at the hands of this empire. Yaupon calls us to remember those who are marginalized, forgotten, mistreated, abused, and calls us to find the paths of prophetic storytelling and reconciliation so that these horrors of our past and present do not hold us back one more day into the future. Yaupon, like the mustard seed, is not irrelevantly simple. Jesus' Yaupon gospel proclaims that, yes, this world is complex, political, communal, spiritual, interdependent, violent, unjust, confusing, and tiring. And when all of that becomes overwhelming, when it feels like the empire is pushing out the organic, growing movement of God, be a farmer and plant some Yaupon. Follow and create community that is local, hospitable, healing, and reconciling. Tell a new story. Tell the stories that free us. The good news holds simplicity amidst all our complexities. And a Yaupon-like community is more powerful than empire. Love's hope, peace, and justice is here, low to the ground, just in our backyards, ready to heal our every ill.
My soul cries out with a joyful shout that the God of my heart is great. And my spirit sings of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight on your servant's plight, and my weakness you did not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed, should the world be about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though I am small, my God, my all, you work great things in me. And your mercy will last from the depths of the past to the end of the age to be. Your very name puts the proud to shame, and to those who would for you yearn. You will show your might, put the strong to flight, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. From the halls of power to the fortress tower, not a stone will be left on stone. Let the king beware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. The hungry poor shall weep no more, for the food they can never earn. There are tables spread, every mouth be fed, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though the nations rage from age to age, we remember who holds us fast. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's crushing grasp. This saving word that our forebears heard is the promise which holds us bound, till the spear and rod can be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn.
Go. Follow God's simple Yaupon spirit in your life, and the kingdom, God's beloved community, will grow among us. Go in peace.